Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jessica Pearson, and I am the Interim Director of Programs for the Human Rights Institute at Columbia Law School. Thank you for joining us today for the prison pandemic, mass incarceration, and COVID-19. And it's my pleasure to introduce our wonderful speakers today. First, we have Qiana Johnson, who is the founder of Life After Release, an organization providing reentry services to the formerly incarcerated. Since her own release from prison in 2017, Qiana has done work around prison abolition and prosecutor accountability and uses her story to empower formerly incarcerated women into becoming productive members of their communities. We also have Cynthia Roseberry, who is the Deputy Director of Policy in the Justice Division of the ACLU, where she works to reform the criminal justice system. During the Obama administration, she served as project manager of the Clemency Project, which provided pro bono support to more than 36,000 applicants for presidential clemency. I'd also like to welcome Fabian Salvioli, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion of truth, justice, reparation, and guarantees of non-recurrence. From Argentina, Fabian is a human rights lawyer and professor of international law and human rights at the School of Law at the University of La Plata. He served on the UN Human Rights Committee, where he was president from 2015 to 2016. And finally, we welcome Scott Hechinger, who is the founder and director of Zealous, a national initiative that works with public defender advocates to improve legal systems using innovative policy, new media strategy, and storytelling strategies. Previously, Scott was the director of policy at Brooklyn Defender Services and co-founded the Brooklyn Community Bail Fund. So thank you all so much for being with us today. We will be taking questions from the audience, so please feel free to put any questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And I'll now turn it over to Scott, who will be leading our discussion. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks so much, Jessica, and thank you all for being here and taking your time to take part in this really important conversation. And to frame the conversation today, I want to start off with a short film. It's a film of indifference and cruelty and also some extraordinary bravery from inside a Miami jail back in April. It's also a film that's emblematic of the way jails and prisons were operating and continue to operate throughout the country. So I'm going to try sharing my screen. And
this call is from the Miami-Dade Metro West Detention Center.
The day the gentleman came in, he looked ill and he was looking fragile and weak. Nobody knew his name. I was sitting up on my bunk and I heard heavy breathing and there was an old man. You could hear it, like wheezy sound, like if he had a lot of fluid inside him and he couldn't breathe right. And we went to the corporal that was on duty. The corporal said, "That's not my problem." He kind of brushed it off his shoulder like, "Yo, whatever." And just walked out and never came back. He didn't even come in the show. So later on that night, I was like kind of like really unresponsive, gagging for breath. So we ran to the door like, hey. They took their precious time to come in. But when the officer did do around, he knocked on the guy's bunk. The guy didn't respond, so he walked off and walked back to his desk. He repeated that action 3 times. It lasted a total of about 10 minutes before he actually got on his radio. The medical staff came and they went to attend to Zealous and he was unresponsive. They gave him CPR. He was kind of already gone already. He kept trying to give him CPR and the machine was like, the guy had no pulse or whatever like that. It looked like if he was lifeless, I think. So they picked him up, wheeled him out, and they never came back in. We all was mad, like, man, you could have really got some help for this guy. Everybody here is afraid. The day that happened, I went to sleep with tears in my eyes and grabbing my Bible. Treat us like they really don't give a damn. Me in the cell full of people that catch the problem could have happened to me because I'm 51 going on 52. And any one of us can die anytime if we take a turn for the worst. Really, like, no type of hope of being inside a jail with this and this type of situation. There's no type of hope.
so today, the violence perpetrated in the street by the state, it's more visible and accessible than ever before through iPhone footage, through social media, And it's become powerful enough to really spark a national conversation, or at least amplify a national conversation that's long been happening, not just about quote unquote reform, but about true transformation and how we invest our money. But the violence inside courts and jails and prisons, which are built to silence people, blocked by physical walls in jail and prison and insulated by legalese in the daily process of the courts, it's made largely invisible, even though it's no less real. And this has become even more so during the pandemic. So in Miami, there was no cell phone footage inside Metro West detention facility back in April, where thousands are continued to be caged pre-trial. There are no photos. Loved ones had long been cut off from visiting, and phone calls weren't happening. Charles Hobbs' sister first heard of his condition when he was already at the hospital, and they called her to ask whether she had the power to sign a do not resuscitate order. That audio of witnesses to the death of Charles Hobbs, the first man to die in Miami jail from COVID, was only available because the detention facility hadn't cut off phone calls with attorneys. And those witnesses were willing to speak up and out, even though they knew it was unlikely to help them. And also they knew it was likely to lead to retaliation, but they were committed to getting the truth out. And it did make a difference. Nearly 1 million people wound up listening and hearing that video once it was released, and became more aware of the conditions inside. Over 3,000 petition signatures were signed for the release of the lead plaintiff in a lawsuit brought by Civil Rights Corps. His name was Anthony Swain, a man who was paraplegic, positive for COVID, and had been detained for over 4 years simply for a drug offense. And when prosecutors and judges still remained unmoved on Mr. Swain, even by the most sympathetic factors you could possibly imagine, the community raised $85,000 to bail him out. And in some ways, most importantly, Charles Hobbs' sister told me afterward that she felt like his death was at least no longer without meaning. But today, 7 months later, local public defenders in Miami are continuing to bang their heads against the wall. A judge wound up ruling against all those incarcerated in the very powerful lawsuit brought by Civil Rights Corps. Local organizers from Dream Defenders and FemPower are still fighting to push for accountability and hold their elected prosecutor, Catherine Fernandez-Rundle, accountable, and begging her to take action. But the numbers in jail today are up from even where they were before. So the story of these courageous men told, and the reason why I played it first, and frankly, the lack of action on the part of the people with the power to do something, not only underscore the violence, cruelty, indifference, and humanity and racism inside of jails and prisons across the country that organizers, defenders, people with direct experience have long known well. But it also underscores the same kind of indifference and cruelty outside of jails and prisons displayed by those in a true position to do something. Our systems, our system actors, prosecutors, and judges, our laws, lawmakers, and leaders across the country have largely done nothing to respond or to change their ways, even in a pandemic. Even those leaders like Governor Cuomo and Bill de Blasio here in New York, and Lori Lightfoot in Chicago, and other Democratic mayors, it's a bipartisan issue, Lori Lightfoot in Chicago, who are responding with speed and urgency to COVID, including the recent uptick, have chosen to ignore human suffering inside jails and prisons, where social distancing is impossible, soap and sanitizer is denied, and medical attention is lacking. And based on preliminary research of hundreds of federal opinions coded and filtered by my organization in partnership with Columbia's own Center for Institutional and Social Change, the Bronx Defenders, and UCLA Law School, as well as a vast array of law students, the vast majority of federal judges remain unmoved, falling back on traditional legal outs like exhaustion, taking the jail's word for it, largely ignoring sworn declarants. And if and when they do anything, it's not even close to enough. According to the Marshall Project today, there are close to 200,000 cases of COVID that have happened in jails, in prisons alone. And just this week, there are more new cases than during the entire pandemic. The number is 13,307. Right before I came on, my colleague in Michigan from the American Friends Services Committee texted me and said that there was 1,006 positive tests just yesterday. Jail and prison numbers are up from where they were during the first wave in every state and locality across the country. And judges, lawmakers, and executives appear more inured to human suffering inside than ever before. So as we move on to questions in this conversation, it's important to note that COVID has really exposed the cruelty of the system in unprecedented ways. And calls for accountability and action have been clearer than ever before. And yet still, even in this remarkable time, the results have largely been strict adherence to the status quo in courts, in legislatures, prosecutors' offices, and mayors and governors' offices. So with that oh so rosy picture of the state of things, I wish I could provide you with a little bit of a pick-me-up given everything that's going on in the world, but got to be realistic. I want to turn to our distinguished panelists and start first with Qiana, although you just disappeared. Are you there? Okay, I'm putting you on the spot. So Qiana, I want to start locally. What's interesting, what's amazing about this panel is we have a real local perspective. We have a national United States perspective, and Cynthia and Fabian, an international perspective. So starting locally, from what I know, and Qiana, you and I have been working together for a while now, the story in Prince George's County, Maryland, where you work, where you live, is really emblematic, similarly to Miami, of the crisis of indifference across the country. Can you tell us about the current situation on the ground in PG County, the numbers of people incarcerated, the current state of the courts, and also how this makes you feel as someone who's both been on the inside and now fighting on the outside?
Yeah, well, thank you, Scott, for inviting me into this space, and for all of you all for having my voice here today. Prince George's County is situated very, I want to start off by saying that we talked about Democratic leaders, and we talked about the, having folks in office, but Prince George's County is largely in part governed by Black individuals, correct? We have Black politicians, Black elected officials. Our state's attorney is Black. Our county executive is a Black woman. And so I just wanted to kind of like set that tone to understand that we are not being led by, by Republicans, for lack of a better word. And right now, we have 748 individuals in our local county jail. And that is about 400 more than would be allowed for social distancing to be able to happen. In about April, we had a push with our state's attorney and our public defender's office to release individuals. And so we were down to maybe 340, roughly 400, right at the 400 mark, which was historically low. For in the last 20 years, our population at our jail has not been that low. And so we celebrated and we were very happy. And the state's attorney took her kudos when she could for being able to work with the public defender's office, who were the real heroes, by the way, in getting these numbers to go down. And so what we had happened was folks came in, Scott had come in and we did campaigns and we did some heavy work on the ground to get our numbers to go down, and that happened. And so what has happened now today at 748, which we are not social distance, and from our court watching program and our jail support program that we have, we know that the prosecutor's office is still either requiring bonds or not becoming allies in the work to ask for no bonds, right? So we have we have the vagabond charges and the charges of individuals who are housing insecure, who are coming through the systems, individuals who have mental health issues, who are coming through the system, who are being held without bond or low money bonds and can't afford bonds, in which we would work to bail those individuals out. But that is where we are right now. So although we had a small section or a portion of relief in the county, we are back up to where we are not able to social distance. We have had last week, we had an individual who told the judge that they had tested positive, and the judge's response was, well, they'll figure it out at the jail because you're going to be locked up. So we don't know what the process is when they are released, if they're being tested. We still don't know, how often they're being tested while they're in there. We know that the supply of masks and other PPE are very low and not consistent in being distributed. So what we have is a very dangerous situation. And what we also know is that our courts are getting ready to close again. And so very, very soon, and going back down to not having any courts because of COVID, because the numbers are getting ready to go back up, and we as a nation, we are very concerned about the numbers rising. So we're getting ready to shut back down and go to a phase 1 as a county. And again, the folks who are in cages are not being referenced. No one is paying attention to them, but us, of course. And you know, we have a situation that's going to be dire, and we're going to lose people.
Thank you, Qiana. Cynthia, you've been a public defender. You've helped lead the fight for clemency, and now you have a major national perspective on what's going on, kind of nationally, state by state. I wonder if you could speak to what the intransigence of our criminal legal system in states and localities around the country, even in a moment like COVID, where it should theoretically be most flexible and merciful. What does this tell us about our systems?
Well, thanks for that question, and thanks for having me here today. And I'm honored to be among the panelists who are here as well. The intransigence in our system tells us that we've not evolved, right? And that for the few of us who embrace the data-driven part of it, there's not been an ear to hear that, to move. But as a greater society, it tells us that, you know, when you strip the humanity from people and seek to punish and not to rehabilitate them in any way, and then fail to measure your success, right? And I say that in the context of, I was a member of the Colson Task Force for the Federal Bureau of Prisons. I remember asking the person who was over mental health whether they measured the impact of incarceration on people, and the answer was no. So if we don't know what we're doing when we're doing that, why are we doing it, right? And the answer can only come from the place of the origin of the system, which is the slave system in America, which is still enshrined in the exception clause in our Constitution, right? That you can have slavery and servitude, involuntary servitude, for being convicted of a crime. So it tells us that this system is working the way it always has, and that we've not evolved to a place where we've been able to identify our own humanity so that we can see the humanity in others. We need not punish everybody for every infraction, right? We need not put them people in cages, but when we do, we are responsible for their health. We are responsible for their rehabilitation. And so it tells us that we failed miserably, and that except for those of us who are touching it intimately, there's not a lot of heart, right, for the folks who are caught up in this system.
I agree with everything you just said. And thank you for saying it like that. Fabian, your current UN mandate is on transitional justice issues, but you were also former member and chair of the UN Human Rights Committee. And I also understand that you recently delivered guidelines to follow for UN member states and how to address petitions for release because of the danger of COVID for people who are charged with the most serious offenses, you know, you can kind of imagine: war crimes, crimes of humanity, genocide. To the extent you can you give us a sense of the international landscape when it comes to COVID? I was on a panel last night at York College in the UK, and I learned a lot about what's going on there, but I don't really have a good sense of how other countries are dealing with this. So if you have a sense of generally the international landscape when it comes to concerns about COVID in prisons, within the context of international human rights obligations for people deprived of their liberty, and what, if anything, leaders and advocates in the United States could learn from best practices abroad?
Okay, thank you very much, Scott, for having me. It's a real pleasure to be in this panel. Totally agree with Qiana, and especially with Cynthia said. So for me, the point of depart is there are international human rights obligations in terms of human rights. That means the state is violating human rights. So, and there are treaties binding, of course, for the US as the ICCPR. You mentioned the Human Rights Committee. The Human Rights Committee is the body to interpret and apply the International Civil and Political Rights Covenant that the US ratified. And Article 10 of the ICCPR clearly established that all persons deprived of their liberty shall be treated with humanity. And that should be enough. That should be enough. And of course, the privation of the liberty is just for reformation and social rehabilitation. So, without COVID, situations of overcrowding or not providing social aid or not providing medical care is a violation of human rights. Without COVID, without the pandemic. So the point for starting, for me, this discussion is to clearly establish that right to health is binding, is a human right, is not a choice, but an obligation for the state in order to provide it to all people, and moreover for people deprived of their liberty, because the state is responsible. I'm sure in the next years, the international bodies will receive millions of petitions against different states for violating the right to health and inhuman treatment, because right to health is linked direct with the human dignity and the prohibition of torture and inhuman and degrading treatment. So, and of course, for lawyers in the US, my advice is go to international bodies. In the Inter-American system, you can ask for for a hearing, thematic hearing in the Inter-American Commission, for Human Rights. And of course, in the UN system, the special procedures, there is a clear special procedures on the right to health, but the state became responsible for the deprivation of the life, not just the health, of the life. So this is a second important issue. So for me, it's time to take seriously the obligations of the state in all countries about human rights. It's not a choice, it's not an option, it's an obligation for the state, the right to protect. And moreover, the right to protect the rights of people deprived of their liberty, because it's their responsibility, 30%, the responsibility of the state. Well, I will stop here for now. I'm sorry because my English is terrible, but I try to do my best.
I understood everything, but I'm coming right back to you just for a follow-up question, which is, are there any countries that you know of? We know the U.S. is not coming close to the obligations under these international human rights norms and treaties and institutions. Are there any countries that are coming close, that are doing it better than others? Are there any models out there? Is there any hope?
Well, you know, again, with or without pandemic, the most serious countries are the countries who follow the rules of the international human rights law. That means Scandinavian countries, for instance. But in Latin America, it's a disaster because the overcrowding. So, and Africa, same. So the problem is not a value for the society treats with humanity people deprived of the liberty. We need to change the perspective of the society. In the US, well, the problem is worse now because the people is paying the horrible Trump administrations in terms of human rights in general and in terms of the non-treatment of the pandemic in particular. So, and we had the consequence.
You mentioned, the need to change the perception of society, and this. I was going to ask a question kind of in reverse, which is why, what, and this is to everyone. What do you think is holding more U.S. leaders back from mass releases, even in this, the so-called easy cases like low-level offenses? And I hate line drawing, just throwing this out there, but even in these cases that should be easy, technical parole violations, elderly people, juveniles, people within the last few years of their sentence. What do you think? What do you think is holding leaders back? And it's connected, I think, in my mind, to the people that they're accountable to. The general public and how they feel about people who are incarcerated. And I want to point out that we're talking both here about the session's titled prisons, but we're talking about jails where the vast majority of people are held pre-trial, presumed innocent, or being held on very short sentences for low-level crimes, and prisons which are post-conviction. So, question to all panelists, and anyone can jump in. What's holding back the U.S. leaders at this point?
So I'll jump in. I can't help but think about all of the videos that we're seeing right now of public executions, largely of Black men. And I think about the Black codes where Black people were not allowed to testify in court. And I can't help but connect that to the fact that these voices have been raised forever, but not heard. And so now we're moving to a space where they can't be ignored because there's video evidence, right? But when you can ignore your constituency because it cannot donate to your campaign or does not have influence on your campaign, you must have heart. I go back to heart and humanity around it, to be a servant of the people, a public servant of the people, rather than a self-server, right? And so, that piece of it, I always go back to the heart of it. But I think there around the rhetoric, there are some truths, right? That, but for people like Qiana doing the amazing work that she's doing, the re-entry help for people coming back is lacking. And so when people say, oh, we can't bring you back because we don't have a way to fully reintegrate you, in part that is true. And so we need to invest there. And the last thing I'll say is we've got to stop looking at this system in a vacuum. This system is one part of our entire system, our education system, our health system, housing, the economic system. All of them are inextricably intertwined and are the reason that we have touches, or that people have touches with the system, and that people aren't listening to the idea that we should do this differently.
Qiana, on just building off of Cynthia's point about leaders actually feeling obligated to listen to their constituents, and in this case, people who are currently incarcerated. In PG County, Aisha Braveboy, at least outwardly, you mentioned her, she's the state's attorney, so she's the top prosecutor in the county. I see her on Twitter. She's hashtagging Black Lives Matter. She's her constituents, it seems like, do care about racial justice, about social justice, about beyond just public health. And so I wonder, in PG County, what's going on? Like, what's your sense of the disconnect between a person who actually has the power to do enormous good, both for individuals who are incarcerated and their families, but also the public in terms of public health. What's the disconnect there between her and her constituents?
So there really isn't a disconnect. And just to piggyback off what Cynthia was saying, there's no disconnect at all. Politicians are going to politic. And so that is what's happening. What's happening is that across this country, prosecutors have found a way to be quasi-heroes in co-opting the movement of Black Lives Matter, in which I am also organizer for Black Lives Matter DC, and also Muriel Bowser and some of the other Black women that are in positions of power, mayors and prosecutors. What they're doing is, because it's so hard for them to be in these positions and trying to please FOP, right? And trying to also please the constituents who elected them in, and the rising population of formerly incarcerated people who can now vote, especially in the state, in the District of Columbia, which is not a state yet, we're fighting for statehood, but also in Prince George's County, where we are now being able to vote. So what we have now, what we're noticing is that at one point in time, when formerly incarcerated people could not vote and we did not have a voice and a seat at the table, our issues were not really issues that elected officials wanted to address. But now that we are becoming a part of the constituent bases and we are starting to have a voice that they cannot any longer ignore, what we have is politicians that don't really know what to do. And so what they're doing is they are taking the easy route by co-opting movements and speaking in Black Lives Matter and going to protest some of them, and also painting Black Lives Matter murals on the streets of the different cities, and thinking that that is enough, when they are not going into the courtrooms and applying or creating policy that would allow for them to have a real change in the courtrooms and a real change period, so that we can have the things that we need on that level. And so I just want to point back, and I'll probably talk about this throughout this where we are now. I don't know how many folks remember in 1971, the Attica Uprising, where we had prison conditions was an issue in 1971. We still have those same very issues right here now and today. And so a shame on all the elected officials who are co-opting movements and having and giving surface value to our movements that we are working very hard on the ground with mutual aid, with jail support, with participatory defense, and actually being in these courtrooms, when they just get to have press conferences and just spit out things that are not really happening. And so that shame on those elected officials for doing that.
But you bring up an important point about accountability, Qiana, which is that, it's one thing for these elected officials to be able to kind of hide behind these slogans and say they're doing one thing and do another. Where, like, for everyone, from the international perspective, national perspective, local perspective, what does accountability look like, and what does the right accountability look like in terms that will help distinguish fact from fiction? There's these major bully pulpits that the mayors and governors and Aisha Braveboys and prosecutors have. How do we fight back against this narrative of who's incarcerated and what actually is happening, and perhaps why this should matter to all of us, even if we're not incarcerated, don't know anyone is incarcerated, isn't oppressed in the communities that we live in? I know Qiana's got some thoughts on that, but anyone can jump in.
I just practice step up and step back. So I always like to, if I was the last person speaking, I always like to give the floor to other folks. But yeah, I guess just the elected officials, they should really, really know better. And the reason why we should be paying attention to this is because in Black Lives Matter, we have a campaign and something that we live by. It's like, who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. And so elected officials, they're really not, for folks who are not incarcerated, and for folks who don't have anybody that's incarcerated, which I find that hard to believe, or can't, have no connection to the mass incarceration system and feel as though that this issue doesn't bother them. Think about the actual people that are committing crimes are doing this because, as Cynthia stated earlier, there's no housing. They don't have health care, right? They don't have transportation. They don't have basic needs that they need to have met for survival. So when you think about whose house is going to get broken into, they're not going to go break into the houses of individuals who don't have the same things they don't have. They're coming into neighborhoods where we live, where they have the things that we want. So you are going to be affected by this at some point or another. And so to think about it as from that standpoint of enforcing elected officials to get what it is that we need, it costs a lot less to house someone for a year than it does to incarcerate them, right? So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. If you're not connected to incarceration, you soon will be, because as COVID increases and as the desperation levels of individuals and the numbers of employment continue to increase, you can almost better believe that so will crime if we are not ensuring that individuals or show harm. I say harm. I believe that crime is something made up by people in power, and that we have to start to identify what harms are being done in our community rather than what crime. Because jaywalking and hanging one of those air fresheners on your rearview mirror, those are crimes, believe it or not. They're victimless crimes, but they're crimes nonetheless. So we're actually talking about harm that is being done in our community, and how are we restoratively handling those harms that are being done outside of just saying, car theft is a crime, right? But who was really harmed if the insurance company is going to come in and pay that, right? Would it cost our community less to find bus passes or lift codes to get people from point A to point B, rather than folks feeling they have to go out and commit a crime of car theft? So I just wanted to kind of put that in the space and put that out there too.
But you're talking about reason, Qiana, and reason doesn't really work well against fear, which is what, unfortunately, our leaders tend to peddle, even when there's these, when there's even small reforms, small changes. That gets back to what you were saying, Cynthia, about, it's counter to reason.
Right. When I think about accountability, I think about, when I was a federal defender, I could never show up to court unprepared, right? That would be a violation of my oath. And when I think about elected officials not becoming educated around the facts that people age out of crime, that people are particularly vulnerable to COVID in prison. There are certain groups, the elderly, people with underlying health conditions, are vulnerable to COVID. What the CDC recommendations are, even with respect to distancing and the fact that you cannot social distance in a cage. I think about the need for people to whom we give the power to govern, to show up prepared to do their jobs. And also I think about the breadth of people who are responsible. It's not just, the prosecutors who are responsible, who could not ask for a detention, right? Or change the policies of the crimes that they prosecute, right? And police officers who could not arrest for infractions that are small, that only deserve a ticket, and governors who can commute sentences and get people out of jail, and judges who can set people free. You spoke to that earlier, and sheriffs, right, who can do the same thing with arrests, and then probation and parole officers and boards who can expedite the release of people who deserve to be released. So there's a breadth of people who should be accountable to us for their actions in the system. And many are woefully unprepared for those jobs because they don't know the facts, they don't know the data around the work that they're doing, frankly, and just follow the rhetoric. Scott, I think the work that you're doing in telling the stories of people, you started this session, right, by tapping into our humanity and helping us understand how traumatizing it is to be put into a cage, right? And then the folks who had to watch this death are further traumatized by that. And there not being any official who's willing to step up and say, I'm responsible for that, and I'm going to make it right. That's where we get our accountability.
If you allow me, well, of course, I share the point of view expressed by Cynthia and by Qiana. And I would like just to add with that we need a culture of human rights. We need a society based on human rights. Because if not, leaders do anything. And that is a serious problem. That is a serious problem. So I see with really concern the hate speech in different parts. So the inhumanity of some speeches against migrants or other people in the most vulnerable situation. And against that, we need a culture of human rights. For that, those leaders based in authoritarian regimes hate social movements, hate women movements, hate Black Lives Matter. Because the key for a society based in human rights is hand to hand with civil society organizations. That is the history in all the world, and we need responsibility in the public officers, but we need a strong society based in human rights, and for that we need movement on social movements, active social movements, and education. For that also they have education in human rights. And also there is another big issue for a seminar itself, the responsibility of the media. The responsibility of the media. So that this is another issue, serious issue. In my last report to the Human Rights Council dedicated to the memorialization for serious human rights violation, and I highlight the responsibility of the media in the genocide in Rwanda.
Mm.
So there is a responsibility, and now the internet and some platforms are we need to discuss on that seriously, based in human rights obligations. Another and final issue for me is many lawyers in the US, they don't know that they can present individual communications to the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. In addition to the possibility to ask, because this general situation, a hearing, thematic hearing on the COVID pandemic and the situation of people in prison, lawyers could present individual communication for obtain decision for the from the Inter-American Commission on the international responsibility of the state for violating the American Declaration of 1948. So that's another important issue.
So stay unmuted, because I'm going to turn to audience questions, and there's one directly on point from, hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Nisha Ghosh. And the question is, where has the International Court been successful in taking a state to task for not honoring its human rights treaty obligations? And that's broad, but let's narrow it to, in this context, around prison conditions, and perhaps even most recently or right now with regard to COVID in prison.
Well, when we adopted the concluding observations on the US in 2014, I was in the Human Rights Committee. We highlight the situation on the people detained in Guantanamo Bay. It was not the COVID, it was another situation, and the Obama administration took our concluding observations for take some steps. And when the International Court of Justice delivered the judgment in the, I guess it was a Lagrand case in the Germany against the US, the US administration said we will not follow the decision of the international um, court, but in fact, they did it because it was an order delivered to all people to inform people detained that they had the right to ask consular assistance in the US. So there is more effect that we think in the decisions of the international community for different states. That's my experience in the Human Rights Committee at least.
Thanks, Fabian. I'm going to go to a question from Nicole Dvorak. Sorry, I'm terrible at pronouncing names, apparently. Qiana, Nicole gave you a shout out. Nicole here from Howard County, Maryland. Big shout out to Qiana Johnson. All right, so here's a really specific, concrete question, and it relates to what we've been talking about with regard to accountability and the media and truth. How do we make sure we're getting the most accurate information from jails, detention centers, prisons, et cetera, on population numbers, how often they're testing for COVID, without submitting an information, a PIA, an information request? We know that, this is Nicole speaking, across the country, the population of inmates, just dropped down, and I actually don't like calling them, I'm gonna say the population of people incarcerated that have contracted COVID has to be larger, if not much larger than reported. So what are the top 1 to 3 things, this is a really direct question, what are the top 1 to 3 things we should be doing right now to demand more information and frankly, correct information?
So to say that we have to do anything outside of getting a PIA or MPIA is saying that we trust the system to work or we trust the system to do something that it wasn't designed to do. And so I want you to reach out to Life After Release, and I'll put my information in the chat box, because what we have to do is we do have to request through MPIA in order to get some type of accurate information, and to also put on notice, to also let them know that we are asking for this information. Otherwise than that, if there's nothing that's binding them or holding their feet to the fire, you're probably not going to get the information that you're looking for. And I only say that because here in Prince George's County, we're working very closely with CRC, the Civil Rights Court, who had to actually sue our jail here in Prince George's County to get any information, just to get a list, right, Scott? Just to get a list from the jail, we had to file a lawsuit because they were tight-lipped and they were not giving us anything. And so what I'm committed to do and what we are committed to do, we also have a court watching program that's community court watch that is huge. We have about maybe almost 50 trained volunteers, and we're broken up into committees, and we're actually doing MPIAs right now to our jail for certain information around pretrial release. And so I would encourage you, one, to come on to our orientation, which is every Wednesday virtually. And then two, reach out to me so that we can start to identify some of the folks that are already doing work on the ground in Howard County, and maybe we can come into coalition because in Maryland, we have 24 counties, and we really need to have a statewide coalition around this where we are attacking all of the county officials, all 24 of state's attorneys, all 24 wardens, all 24, the folks that we need to contact in order to put that type of pressure on them.
Let me just really quickly also say for the audience, if you don't know what the Court Watch program is, it sounds, okay, so you just go into court and that's it. But the thing that's amazing about court watching is that you're actually trained in the language of court and the processes of court. And you don't need to be a lawyer. You just have to be someone who's interested in taking this on. Previously, it was, if you go into court, even if you're a lawyer, you go into another court that you've never been in before in another state, you're not going to understand what's going on. The acoustics are terrible. The language is different. They talk in penal law. And so volunteers are trained in how to understand what's going on and take notes and have forms and are able to provide that accountability. I just wanted to add that. And it's not just happening in PG County, it's in New York City, it's increasingly all over the country. And if you just type in Court Watch programs in your area and Google, you'll be able to find some. Anyone else want to answer that question before moving on to the last couple?
Yeah, I'll just add that at the ACLU, we did a number of Freedom of Information Act requests across the nation to get this information, and have had to file a lawsuit in order to obtain some of this information. And we also on ACLU.org keep track, sadly, of the deaths on death by incarceration, so that we can use that in our advocacy so that those sacrifices, those human sacrifices, won't be in vain.
Thank you for that. I've got another an interesting and very specific question. So this is from Carlos Franco Paredes. I'm a physician collaborating with ACLU Civil Rights Corps. Qiana mentioned is working in PG County and around the country in efforts responding to COVID-19. I've inspected most of the largest correctional facilities, and the argument about human rights, unfortunately, is not well received by judges during court hearings. And the only way that they're actually listening is when we present public health reasons, particularly when we suggest protecting correctional officers in the larger community, which ties in just to who judges, what lives judges are valuing. The question is, what can we do to change the narrative as medical experts, collaborating with civil rights attorneys to engage judges in terms of the human rights violations of the people who are currently incarcerated?
I'm happy to jump in. I don't want to step forward too much, Qiana, as you mentioned, but I'm happy to talk about the way we look at advocacy is just based on our human, right, our heartbeat. And I would offer that to the extent that you can take how people suffer, not just the fact of suffering, right? As a medical expert, you know what this suffering is doing to the body. You know the pain that the person is feeling. You know what they're going through. And when you can open up that narrative, when you can tell that story to reach the humanity, the heartbeat of a judge, it's very hard to ignore that. So I would implore you to bring the expertise that you have about the human body and how it experiences pain as a result of this inhumane treatment to the narrative for the advocacy.
Really appreciate that answer. Anyone else want to add anything? Okay. Another really specific question, and I really like these, from Bakura Shabazz. How do you all suggest we fight to end all forms of immunity? She doesn't say this, but and impunity to address bad actors that also contribute to our mass incarceration epidemic. And so going back off of the idea that it's not just, focusing on once you're in jail, pre-trial, let alone in prison post-conviction, but police on the front end who it's very hard to hold accountable, and prosecutors who bring the charges, allow cases to come into the first place.
I don't want to be the only.
No, come on. You gotta go. It's like, we got 6 minutes left. Whoever takes it.
Again, policing in America is based on the original model. The badge with the star that they wear is the slave patrol badge that was originally used to deputize white men to catch slaves. So we have to start there, right? At the roots of the system. So we have to chop out that root of that system. I personally believe that police have too much power over elected officials. The coffers fuel their campaigns, their endorsements fuel their campaigns, and then they bully progressive prosecutors into doing what they want them to do. And, police action is local, right? It's either the local council or the local mayor that puts that police chief in charge. So we need to hold those people accountable. Many of the police contracts have a law enforcement officer's Bill of Rights that creates tremendous immunity for them in these systems. We need to look at these and challenge these. Some of them trump the rights of the accused, which are constitutionally enshrined. And so, I am a proponent, I think, as I mentioned earlier, of the fact that when we take those resources and assets from that powerful bully and place them on the front end for preventive measures, then that's how we attack the power of that bully.
if I can, fully agree. We can discuss the penal system, and we need to discuss the penal system. But in other side, I guess no one is in favor of impunity, at least not me. So I am working for prosecuting and punish the most serious crimes and accountability for the responsibles of genocide, war crimes. But even for those terrible people, the condition of prison should be human. So why we are discussing this elemental issue? So in where is our society for discussing this elemental issue? So of course, if you commit an offense, well, yes, and you have a fair trial and the presumption of innocence and all the guarantees where you can be condemned, that's clear. But the condition of the prison should be humans. Is elemental, and it's a serious advice for us discussing elementary issues.
Thank you so much. Last question, somewhat rapid fire. The election just happened. It's still happening. I don't know what's going on, but well, I kind of do, and it's not pleasant. If you could pick one criminal justice upshot from the elections around the country, recognizing that federal jurisdiction is relatively limited when it comes to criminal justice, it's mostly a state and local issue, but whether you look at Oregon, and the fact that they decriminalized most drugs and the legalization of marijuana, even in states that Trump won overwhelmingly, like it was South Dakota, and obviously the federal election. What's the one upshot that gives you some hope, just in general, but also even if it didn't explicitly speak to it, with the COVID crisis in jails and prisons? Qiana, I'm going to have you start. We're going to go around rapid fire.
You got to give me the last part of that again, because you were going.
Right, what's something that happened coming out of the election, a criminal justice upshot that gives you hope, that our movement to humanize, that our movement to try to decarcerate, their movement to make things fairer might happen? There could be nothing.
Yes, nothing. I am sadly disappointed in our choices for the election. I'm sadly disappointed at the, where we are. Biden and Kamala are not my choices, and I don't feel as though when it comes to criminal justice reform, Trump wasn't either. That's what I said. We had a very our pool of candidates is indicative of just where we are as a society. And, Senator Harris, Kamala Harris had locked up so many folks, so many Black folks, and Biden was responsible for a lot of our crime bills and things of that nature. So I don't think, the only thing that I think, honestly, I always like to look at the glasses half full. I will say that our movement has become stronger as a result of this election. And we know that we can't go to sleep at this turn, as many folks did when Obama was elected. They were rocked back to sleep, and we had a lot of things happen as a result of that. So I think that our movement has become stronger, and that we have been organizing and we have been mobilizing, and we are ready to make some changes. I will say that Cori Bush, I'm very happy about Cori Bush, and I think that some good things will come out from that. But as far as the presidential level, we just have to organize and get out in the streets and make some changes.
Thanks, Qiana. We have less than 30 seconds. Cynthia, like 10-second.
Sure. Hope is faint, but it's hard to kill. And I am empowered and encouraged by our youth who are engaged now, who are powerful and will not have their voices denied. They give me hope.
And thank you. And Fabian.
fully agree. Women voices are fine for me.
And I'll just quickly say that the wins, however small and kind of obvious to me, legalizing marijuana, and even the step further, drug decriminalization in Oregon, gives me some hope that, first of all, less people are going to be brought in the system to begin with, which obviously on the back end reduces the number of people who are incarcerated, hopefully allows for reinvestment into communities, and also just where these changes are happening. They're not only in blue states, they're in red states, because criminal justice, whether you care about the human fiscal responsibility, or if you're a libertarian, you care about government hands off, criminal justice transformations got something for everyone. And just kind of this election underscored that for me. But yeah, Qiana, that's me. Glass is half empty. Qiana, I'm feeling a little bit you're at too. So Jessica, are we at time?
Yes, thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Qiana Johnson, Cynthia Roseberry, Fabian Salvioli, and Scott Hechinger for that powerful and important discussion. We will be sharing a recording of this event, so please feel free to share that widely. And I'd also just like to let you know that our next event that we are co-sponsoring with social justice initiatives, called From Local to Global: How the Black Lives Matter movement has influenced the international fight for racial justice, will be on Monday at 12:45, and we put the link in the chat. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and we hope you have a restful weekend. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.